So we're ready to eat those. Go ahead, Yellow Dean. We are going to talk a little bit about leadership. The fact that it's Father's Day weekend, it makes sense that we would discuss the leaders of the children of Israel and the leadership that they were provided. We looked at the parashah we read today. In the parashah in Numbers 13, it's a Shalach Lecha Anashim Yaturu et Eretz Kanaan Asher Ani Natan Livnei Israel, and you will send men, Anashim, into the land of Canaan, which I will give to the children of Israel. Livnei Israel. And then he says, Ish echad, Lamate Avotav, Tishlechu Kol Nasi Behem. Tishlechu Kol Nasi Lachem. So it means that each one, Ish echad, each man, will be a leader, Nasi, among their people. It's interesting that this parashah about the spies, 10 of them weren't providing a very good report. But these are leaders. Every one of the 12 that were selected, Ish echad, each man of the tribes of Israel, will be a leader you send into Eretz Canaan. And 10 of them come back with this report that is negative. These grasshoppers, right? We are like grasshoppers to these men, these sons of Anak. And as I was thinking through this, I can't help but think about Moshe. And Moshe's desire was to take the children of Israel over into the land that God had prepared for them. I mean, he was called out from Egypt. Well, first he ran out of Egypt because he, murdered a guy, protecting another guy. But he ran out of Egypt, and he was called into this mountain. And then he spent time with God, and then God said, go and get these people, and he goes and get these people, and he fights, and he fights, and he fights, and he says to Pharaoh, let my people go. And, he pulls these people out into the desert, and the only goal that Moshe had for all these years, the only goal, the only objective as a leader he had was to get them to the place that God had called for them. That was it. Moshe had an objective the entire time he was in the land. His objective was to get the people to know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they would learn who he was, that they would understand how to interact with each other, and that they would develop a society in the land that God would provide them. That was their number one goal. So as he was in the desert, they were achieving that, right? He was leading the people of Israel. They were achieving that. They received the Ten Commandments. They received the entire Torah from God. They learn among themselves. They appoint elders among the people and they among the tribes. And so they're building this and they're creating this society in the desert. And his goal was that he could see them cross over. But he made some bad choices, which did not enable him to do so. Deuteronomy chapter 3, it says, and I besought the Lord at that time, verse 23, saying, Lord God, thou hast begun to show thy servant thy greatness and thy mighty hand, for what God is there in heaven or in earth that can do according to thy works and according to thy might. I pray thee, let me go over and see the good land that is beyond the Jordan, that goodly mountain and Lebanon. But the Lord was wroth with me for your sakes, and would not hear me. And the Lord said unto me, let it suffice thee. Speak no more unto me of this matter. No more will you ask me to do this. Because the Lord was wroth with Moshe. In the final days of his 120-year journey in life, Moshe speaks to this new generation of Jews who are about to embark on this rewarding climax into the promised land. Generation that was the generation that went in and spied out the land was a new generation. It wasn't the generation that had sinned, the one that had to die off in the wilderness, but this was a new generation that would enable the people of Israel to become the kingdom of Israel. No longer are they a people wandering in a society, but now they're going to become a kingdom, providing a more fit body of people that would implement the mandate to serve as God's chosen nation of priests and holy people. The call that was given to them at Sinai just 40 years earlier. They had to have a place, a home base, where they could be the nations, the priests to all nations in the world. They had to go into this place that God had called them out to. They had 10 people walking into that land and saying, there's no way that we can take this land, even though God says, leave Bnei Israel. Even though God says, I give this, Ashenatan, which I give. Ani natan livnei Israel. 10 people, 10 rulers, Nasi, from the tribes of Israel, say, this is not our land. 2, Yehoshua and Caleb. Salvation and the dog say, this is our land. God said, it says, Ani natan livnei Israel. I give this to Israel. They had to have a place where they could be the rulers and have a kingdom so that all the world could come to them and learn. They had to be led there. All leadership. I skipped something. But as I progress through the teaching today, I want us to keep in mind the necessity of right leadership for the right circumstances. There's not always the right leadership in the right circumstances. And occasionally we get into a position where there's somebody leading that doesn't belong in the leadership role. At this point in time, Moshe's like, I want to take these people over, but God said, your time is done. You know, God never intended that Moshe take them into the land of Israel. God intended them to take them from Egypt. God intended Moshe to take them out of Egypt. He never intended for him to take them into the land of Israel. If he did, it would have happened. But he did intend that Joshua take him into the land of Israel. It was not Moshe's role. Moshe played his role. Moshe did exactly what God had called him to do. And his time was done. It was time now to move to a new leadership. All leadership is not good for every circumstance. And at the same point, one may need to be transformational, and at another point, one may be required to act transactional. But nonetheless, not every leader is equipped to deal with all circumstances and the changing tides of time and destiny. Not every leader is equipped to deal with the new circumstances that come our way. Leadership is, however, the most critical component of life's many journeys. Moshe was not a leader that could take somebody through every circumstance. He was not that guy. Moshe was jaded. Imagine him. I mean, he was jaded by all of these people of Israel. He was by the men that had died in the wilderness and the women that had died in the wilderness. Imagine he's going to take this new generation of Jews into the land of promise. They had to have an encouraging, a vibrant, youthful, different form of leadership. This old form of leadership that Moshe was bringing as an old man, it wasn't going to work. Just wouldn't have worked. He was probably thinking, oh, you kids are going to be just like your parents. It's just a matter of time, and you're going to too turn from God. Shame on you. I mean, I can imagine, especially the older we get, the more crotchety we get. That's a truth. Don't act like it's not. Trudy's giving me a dirty look. Imagine Moshe in his old age, he was probably a train wreck, sitting in his rocking chair at the edge of the foothill of the mountain, complaining, I'll be there. Even if one is considered a leader, there's a point where he or she is required to be a follower and simply lay down his or her ability, allowing the circumstances to define the required leadership and selecting the attributes necessary to bear the burden of that moment in time. I believe that the Scriptures provide us with the context that God Himself creates and established leaders that aid us in navigating through tumultuous and or peaceful times. As it states in Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, and He changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. Our journeys have all been a series of experiences that have passed each of us from the hands of one leader to the hands of another. However, each passing, I believe, has been the result of God's divine response to those of us that love Him and seek to walk in His ways and His laws. There is no one in this earth that is exempt from following another, no matter if one is a king or a president or a magistrate that dictates laws. Everyone is subject to someone in this life and thus required to submit and learn submission. Occasionally, submission is leadership. If one can submit, you're showing leadership. We have to learn to submit to God, to show leadership to others in the world around us. The children of Israel were not always so fortunate to have great leaders like Moshe and Yehoshua, and as a result, they suffered terribly. But they were relieved from the hands of their oppressors in God's perfect and unquestionable timing, and were delighted to have experienced the superior guidance of leaders that submitted themselves to God, so as to be a conduit of His desires rather than the manufacturer of their own. The worst thing we could possibly be is under a leadership that the individual has their own agenda and not God's. If the leader that we're under is manufacturing their own agenda, their own ideas, you lose. You lose. Not the leader, you lose. The leader wins because it's his agenda. Ultimately, he loses. But while we're here on this life, because this is all we've got, right? We've got 70 to 120 years. Let's pray for the latter. But this is all we've got. So if you submit yourself to a leader who's under their own agenda, and you're being tossed to and fro in the waves of that agenda, whose fault is that? The truly successful leaders of this world have the ability to submit their own will to the greater purpose that is necessary to carry out the outcome of each circumstance to a successful end. However, Though one may be a great leader, that does not necessarily suggest that he or she is incapable of failure. Even good leaders fail. It is ultimately how that leader responds in the midst of failure that marks his or her true ability to lead. And in the end, they will display courage to withdraw when time and circumstance chooses another in their place. They will know it's time to withdraw. As Moshe had to have known that it's time to withdraw. God has chosen Yehoshua. And imagine the dissonance that Moses had. Lord, I ran from Egypt. I went into that land. I fought for these people. I said, let them go. And you're not even going to let me finish this. And God says it is finished. What you've done is finished. You've fulfilled your purpose. But Moshe was unhappy with that end. He wanted to be the one that marches them in, victorious. Why should Joshua and Caleb march them in victorious? I have done all this hard work. I fought with all these men that died in the wilderness. Why should I not be the one that marches them victorious? And what does God say to him? Speak no more unto me of this matter. Enough. Must speak, Moshe. And Moshe has to do what? He has to get out. He has to come back, and he's got to let it suffice. It's ultimately how that leader responds that shows his true ability to lead. If he can withdraw, have the courage to withdraw when time and circumstance chooses another in their place, he is showing true leadership and that he is in fact the one that was chosen in the first place. But for the next generation, they have to see that. In the passage from Deuteronomy 3, Moshe prays for the opportunity to lead. He can see the land is plenteous, that the land is beautiful, and that God forementioned to his people at Har Sinai that this would occur. And Moshe, striking the rock, he's like, Lord, if I just am not going to do this because I struck a rock, come on, give me a break here. I struck a rock. Who cares? Yeah, I got a little indignant. Did you not get indignant, God? Were you not angry when the children of Israel were down partying at the foothill of Har Sinai? Were you not upset? Did you not want to kill them? Did I not plead with you and say, don't kill them? You brought them from Egypt. What would the world think? What kind of God is this that they would bring you from Egypt and then he would take you into the desert just to slaughter you? And I'm protecting your name, and you are angry and indignant with these people, and now I get angry, I strike a rock, and you keep me from a promised land. Come on. This is the conversation between God and Moshe. I mean, that's why God had to be forceful and say, must speak, Moshe, enough. Let it suffice. Numbers 20, it says, Moses lifted up his hand with his rod. He smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moshe and Aharon, because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. Now, did Moshe and Aharon not believe God? I have a hard time believing that, right? I mean, the water splits, the mountain shakes, the lightning and the thunder comes roaring and striking, And they see these miracles, and the earth opens up, and it swallows up 3,000, and all these things are occurring in this wilderness. And here it says, as he struck the rock, and in the serpents, remember the serpents with the cartouche, or whatever that thing's called, and they look at it, and they were healed from the disease that they had, and the miracles that occurred in this wilderness. And here, God says, because you believed me not. That word is not the belief that you think it is. But the second phrase here, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, that is the key to this statement. Because you did not have the sense to know that when you struck that rock twice, you would be taking from me glory. You're not doing this. You stole from me what I was giving to the people, what I intended for the people, you took from me. Now people say, Moshe can strike a rock and water comes out. Rather than having it be God, now it's Moshe. Moshe takes the glory. Leaders cannot take the glory of God. Moshe had to submit. He had to submit his leadership to God. In this instance, in Numbers chapter 20, but he failed to do so. It clearly states that because Moshe and Aaron did not believe, they would not lead the children of Israel into the promised land. There's much speculation around the timing of the two strikes of this rock. Whether Moshe doubted God because the water did not come out of the first strike, he felt that he needed to strike it again. But it's implausible to think that both Moshe and Aaron who were the agents of God's divine power and glory, who suddenly began to doubt that God, who has shown his power through them in such a miraculous way. The Hebrew word, as I said to you before, in this text, believed me not, is aman. Aman. This means to support or to sustain. It's like emunah, right? The word emunah is faith, belief. This is a different form of that, which is aman, which is to support or sustain. Basically suggesting that Moshe and Aharon failed to support and sustain God's glory in the eyes of the people. As a result, they would not experience the promised land and they would die in the wilderness. But was it not for scoffing and jeering of the Israelites that caused the anger of Moses to kindle against the rock? Does it not seem unjust that God would punish Moshe for his righteous indignation against the people that even God claimed he wanted to destroy? As we said, Moshe and God were having this conversation, but Lord, you even said you want to destroy them. In fact, God even said, I will make an entirely new people directly from you, Moshe. Let's kill them. I mean, it's almost like God was asking for Moshe's, support. I'm going to take them out. I'm going to kill them. And Moshe says, no. And God said, no, I'll make an entirely new people from you. Moshe showed true leadership, and I think it may have been a test of God, right? I don't think God is an unjust God. I think God knew exactly what he was going to do. He's omniscient, so he knows exactly what he's going to do. But if you're putting it into the context of, look, Moshe and God were having this conversation back and forth, and God's trying to see where Moshe's heart really is, and he finds that Moshe's heart is in with the people, and how beautiful is that? And God says, I know I have the right man for them to be led in the wilderness, because this is not going to be an easy task. There's going to be hardship, there's going to be death, there's going to be all kinds of crazy things happening out here, and the person that leads them has to have a heart of sensitivity, of compassion, of understanding. And Moshe shows that. That's the beauty of this interaction that we see, right? We have to put it within context. But it does seem a little unjust of God. If he was this compassionate Moshe, and if he was this understanding person, why would we not allow him to do that? But the rabbis debate this, and the point is that the rabbis believe this is to be a pretext that would allow for God not to appear unjust, in that he had decreed long before that Moses and Aaron would not enter the promised land. He decreed it long before the striking. Numbers 14, it says, say unto them, as truly as I live, saith the Lord, as ye have spoken in mine ears, so will I do to you. Your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me, doubtless ye shall not come into the land, concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Yehoshua, the son of Nun. But your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and they shall know the land which ye have despised. But as for you, your carcasses, they shall fall in the wilderness. The statement, 20 years old and upward, unfortunately includes Moshe and Aharon. So God has to not allow them to cross, because he decrees. They're victims of their generation's failure to believe in God. And it's their fault. They're the leaders. They had to lead their generation in belief. So yes, even you, Moshe, even you, Aharon, you will not enter from 20 years old and up, only your children. Moshe and Aharon themselves never demonstrated this kind of disbelief. However, they were leading this generation. They were required to quell this sort of behavior, and they did not do it. The rabbi stated that God explained to Moses that if he were not buried in the wilderness with the generation that left Mitzrayim, people would mistakenly declare that the generation of the wilderness had no share in the world to come. In the Encyclopedia Judaica, it states that Moshe pleaded with God to appoint a successor to him that would successfully cope with the dissimilar temperaments of the people prior to his required passing into the next life. It also states that Moshe asked that his successor lead the people into war and not remain behind the troops, as was customary practice of the Gentile kings. Moshe understood his commitment to God, and he loved the people to such a degree that he even put into his own life on the line with God several times just to save the people from God's wrath. This is a great leader. Moshe understood there was a transition occurring, and he knew that God was raising up the generation that had not murmured in the wilderness to inherit the promise of Abraham and embrace the covenant as priests and holy people in the world. He knew that God was raising a generation, and that generation needed to be led by someone great. In fact, he felt it needed to be even greater than himself. One that would lead them into war. One that would protect them. However in tune Moshe was with God's intentions for the people of Israel, he still attempted to persuade God, as he did many times before when it came to the children of Israel. He still attempted to persuade him, saying, I pray thee, let me go over and see the good land that is beyond the Jordan, that goodly mountain in Lebanon. But the Lord was wroth with him. He would not hear him, and said unto him, let it suffice. I must speak, Moshe. The fact that Moshe was pleading with God suggests that he understood that he was not exempt from the commands that were established from God's throne. However, like many who labor hard for a long time to realize a specific outcome, they simply want to be around to experience the fruit of their hard work and labor, Moshe desired to bask in the joy of the people after experiencing so much hardship and sorrow in the wilderness. Moshe desired to see the children laugh and leap and dance along streams in this new land that God would provide them. Who wouldn't? All of the hardship, all of the death, all of the suffering from the wilderness. But God refused. Repeatedly. Since the leader of the generation should remain with his followers, the generation of Moshe was buried in the wilderness, and the time had come for Joshua to execute his leadership over the new generation. It's almost as if God is upset with Moshe for wanting to hold on to the position rather than relinquishing the rights and authorities of his position over to Yehoshua, who God had appointed and anointed for this new generation. The point is that this transition from the wilderness into the promised land marked the beginning of a new journey, and it was going to take a new leader to ensure that this time and these circumstances were carefully mapped out and followed according to the laws and statutes that God provided while in the wilderness. It all led up to this, and now was Joshua's time to take the children of Israel, of a wandering a tribe in the desert, to a kingdom of people that serve as priests to the lost nations of the world. This wasn't the end of the leadership change that the children of Israel would experience, as we all know. Many times in Israel would experience poor leadership that ultimately resulted in the exile and near extinction of approximately 85% of the people, exhibited by the wasting away of the 10 tribes via assimilation into the pagan world surrounding them. It is important for us to be aware of the circumstances that shape our spiritual and earthly lives, so that we are able to recognize the leadership that God is raising up for the time and season that we face, and follow with an unreserved abandonment to the ways and laws of God in order to maintain our focus on truth. Imagine, just as in the children of Israel's days, when the 10 tribes get lost and assimilate into the worlds around them. If you're under leadership that is not focused and submissive to God, you too are at risk of assimilating yourself into the pagan worlds around you. 85% of the children of Israel lost. 85% of the children of Israel assimilated into the world around them. And they have no chance. Why? Leadership. After Moshe pleaded with God to allow him to stay and lead the people, and after God said it was enough and the journey has ended, Moshe reiterated all that God had showed him in the wilderness and encouraged them to continue in the commands and the truth of the ways of God as they were established for them at Har Sinai. Deuteronomy chapter 4. We're going to close with Moshe's statements. It says, "Now therefore hearken, O Israel, unto the statutes and unto the judgments which I teach you, for to do them that ye may live. And go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers gives you. Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did because of Baal Peor, for all the men that followed Baal Peor. The Lord thy God hath destroyed them from among you. But ye that did cleave unto the Lord your God are alive, every one of you this day. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me. And ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for?" He says that the world, this separates you from the rest of the world. God's commandments and his truth separates you from the rest of the world. This is your wisdom. This is your understanding. And people around you will look to you and say, what grade of a nation does God draw to but to Israel? And what nation is there so great that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day? Only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons, especially the day that thou stood before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, Gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children. And ye came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. And the Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the voice of the words, but saw no similitude, only ye heard a voice. And he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments. And he wrote them upon 2 tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go over to possess it. Here is your job, nothing else. Solomon the Wise says that all things are meaningless. What is the whole duty of man? To love God, to act justly, to walk humbly with him. Understanding that following his commands and his statutes are the only way to live. And they set you apart from everyone else. They make you different. Every generation has its leader. Every generation has its father. And it's time in this generation to take a stand for the commandments and statutes and judgments of God. Amen. It is our duty to praise the Master of all, to ascribe greatness to the author of creation, for he made us unlike the nations of the lands. Has not placed us like the families of the earth. He's not made our portion like theirs, and our lot like all their multitudes. We bend the knee and bow and acknowledge our thanks before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. He stretches out heaven and establishes foundations of the earth. The seat of his glory is in the heavens above. The presence of his power is in the most exalted heights. He's our God, there is none other. True is our King. There's nothing beside him, as it is written in his Torah, You shall know this day and take to your heart that the Lord, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. There is none other.